I don't really have an explanation for what happened. I have ideas, but here's the story. I'm a freshly graduated high school student on my way to college. During my senior year, I had a job working for my grandfather as a farmhand, more or less a farm manager. He would give me instructions on what to do on the farm without him being there, most commonly feeding the cows. It was early November, and at this time, baseball practice started after school and would last from 3:25 to 5:30. By that time, the sun was almost down when I arrived at work and started getting ready. One day I had gotten dressed, filled up the buckets, and fed the first farm when I realized that I didn't have a key to the other farm. Frustrated, I was forced to pick up 2 buckets at a time and walk them from the fence to the feed trough, a good 40-yard walk. While walking, I was trying to keep myself upbeat and just started to whistle. No real pattern or tune, just something that I came up with. When I came back and put the last buckets in the bed of the truck, I heard something from my neighboring property. It was whistling. Strange, I thought, as no one lives anywhere near that property and it sounded very close. I rationalized it was a mockingbird or something and just kind of went on with my life. The next couple of days I didn't whistle, but the whistling continued. Slowly over those few days it got clearer and clearer until it sounded like regular whistling. Eventually it got louder. When I first heard it, it was very faint. I almost missed it over the crunching of me walking to my truck. In the last few days, I kind of became accustomed to the whistling and kind of expected it. When one day it didn't come, I was a little disappointed. This time, I had brought the key and walked up to the gate and started fiddling with my keys when I dropped them into the grass. I said, "Damn it," when I dropped them. I squatted down and started to search for them when I heard a very faint sound coming from the other property. A low groan or gurgle, and it was getting louder. At this point, I wasn't scared but more curious as to what was going on over there. I left my truck parked across from the property and walked a few feet down the road and hopped the fence at the property where I heard the sounds. The land in there goes straight uphill and is heavily wooded all throughout, and the further you go up, the more dense it gets. Looking back now, I made a few big mistakes that could have gotten me hurt. As I walked up the hill, I would occasionally hear the gurgle. It was far up the hill, so still as faint as it was before. As I walked, a bad smell started to hit my nose, a weird mixture of garbage and wet dog or something. I heard something as I was about to crest the hill. "Damn it." A very dry, low, and quite distorted "damn it" came from a couple of yards in front of me. It sounded like a 60-year-old smoker saying "damn it" very slowly, as if they didn't know English or something. I automatically thought someone was on our property, somewhat angry and paranoid now. I started to move slower. I didn't want this guy to hear me before I could see them. I kept going and stopped and listened when I heard another sound. "Damn it. Damn it. Damn it." This guy was now slowly saying "damn it" normally, not long and drawn out in that eerie way, as if he didn't know English. I sat down on this log, kind of listening, trying to figure out what I should do about this person. He kept saying it over and over, and I noticed his tone was getting higher and his inflection was changing. And it hit me. This guy was perfectly mimicking me. My tone, inflection, literally everything. He even mimicked my frustration when I said it. Angry and kind of scared now, I got up and started to crest the hill. I flicked on my flashlight on my phone. "Hey, this is private property." I was cut off mid-sentence. As I came over the hill, the light barely illuminated this naked figure squatting just a couple of yards in front of me. His eyes were illuminated by the faint glow of my flashlight. I automatically felt that something was wrong. This wasn't a regular person. His neck was longer than normal, and when I came up the hill, he winched his neck and snapped his head to look at me without moving. His eyes were too big, and his head was large and slender. He was squatted in a ballerina-type squat. I looked at his body. He was very skinny. His ribs were showing through his skin. There was a short silence, and like a robot, the man turned in the leaves and slowly stood with his hands next to his side. I was debating if it was even a person. It was far too tall to be a person. "Damn it," it said in my voice. I turned and sprinted down the hill. It didn't feel like I was running, but more that my legs were just going through the motions. I didn't look back before I got to the fence, and when I hopped it, I got in my truck and sped away. Sadly, I still work at that farm, but I've never told anyone this story, not even my grandfather. I've only heard the whistling a few more times since then. I'm not really a believer in the paranormal, and I really try to find an explanation for weird stuff, and I believe that this may have just been some weird squatter, but I really don't know. My father told me a story once, and I'll never forget it for a few reasons. I think it's the first story he told me as a child. It's also the story of how my grandfather died. But honestly, that isn't the reason you hear stories on TV, or sometimes you overhear something in a public place. People talk about ghosts and aliens, and you think to yourself, that isn't real. They're making it up, or they're mistaken, or they're crazy. Something like that. You just can't believe it until something happens, something that brings it all together, connects the dots in a way that you didn't think of before. Maybe it happens to you, or maybe you hear the same story again and again happening to different people. It doesn't take long for the world to become a bit bigger than you thought. As I said, this is a story my father told me, but I never believed it, even though he swore up and down that it was true. It wasn't until I started clicking around the internet that I started to believe. I started to hear other stories just like the one my father told me. It didn't take me long to believe in the rake. That's not what my father called it, of course. He's never used the internet in his life. He wouldn't know what the consensus has taken to naming it. When he chose to call it something other than it or that thing, he called it Skinwalker, after an old Navajo tale his grandfather told him. But I'll tell you the story the way he told it to me. We were out hunting one night, killing coyotes for $50 a skin. We lived on a dairy farm in Ohio, and sometimes we'd kill a calf. We'd do it every night because we needed the money. Sometimes while we were out, we'd come upon a deer and kill it. Our landlord didn't mind, and it could feed our family for a few nights and save us some money. Anyway, we were done making our rounds and heading home, walking because we didn't have a car or a four-wheeler back then, and we'd cut through the woods, and that's when we came upon it. Blood everywhere, splattered on the trees, in the grass, in the creek, everywhere. And at first we figured it was a pack of coyotes. We'd seen it sometimes. They scavenge and then start hunting deer or cattle. The worst was when they bred with feral dogs, but this wasn't like that. When a pack of dogs or wolves or coyotes attack something, they do it right. They'll pick off one that's weak, sick, old, or just small. They'll hunt it, draw it into a corner someplace it can't get out of, and then they'll run it right to the biggest one, the alpha. And that deer will never see that alpha. It might hear it, but it won't see it. It'll just notice that its throat is gone, and then it will drop dead. It's quick, it's clean. That wasn't what happened here. Something had run up on a den of deer. Coyotes won't attack a den, and wolves neither, because they'd get too much of a fight. There were 3, I think. 3 bodies just torn apart. You'd see a head here, a leg there, a torso over there. Predators don't do that. They don't leave behind scraps. What had done this hadn't done it for food. It had done it for fun. But we didn't know that. We saw a bunch of carcasses and we think it's something that we've got to take care of. I remember my dad telling me to go home. He thought it was a pack of feral dogs, but I wasn't leaving him, and I damn sure wasn't walking through 2 miles of woods alone with nothing but a .22 and a pocket knife. I was only 13 at the time, so a .22 rifle was about the only gun I could reliably use. Dad had the shotgun, and he wasn't going anywhere without it. It took me a while to convince him, but finally we began tracking whatever did that. It wasn't hard either. We just followed the blood. Either that thing bled a deer before it got away, or it dragged one for a mile. I don't know. I know that I'd never seen my dad scared before that night. We started hearing noises. I've been in a lot of woods in my life. I've been all over the world, and I ain't never heard noises like I heard that night. I heard things screaming, deer and fox and rabbits and raccoons and birds, just scared. Now keep in mind, this is maybe 12 or 1 o'clock. Except the fox and some birds, nothing was supposed to be awake. But they weren't just awake, they were moving. I saw flocks of birds that night fly straight into trees just trying to get out of there. We came upon a pack of coyotes, nearly shot a couple, thinking that it was what we were looking for. But then we saw that they were running towards us. They ran right past us, didn't even notice, and then some deer did the same, and then some rabbits, squirrels, foxes, even a couple of wild hogs. These things were supposed to be eating each other, and the only thing they cared about was getting out of there. We should have put it together that maybe whatever we were tracking, it wasn't something we were supposed to see, and it wasn't something we could kill. I don't know why we didn't just go home. I guess we were curious. I think that was my dad's nature, to go toward trouble, to fight. And knowing what I knew about what my father did during the war, my nature was to stay close to him. We finally get into an open valley. It was normally a soy field, but it wasn't in season, so it was just flat dirt. We saw the tracks. Then a lot of the animals fleeing the forest had paved over the land. But where the deer blood was, nothing had taken a single step, like they were leaving it for us to find. The tracks were shallow. Whatever it was couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, but that didn't mean much. A bobcat weighing around 40 pounds nearly tore my damn throat out once, and all that means is that it's quick and it's hard to hit. So we follow the tracks, and it doesn't take long for us to find where it is. There's this old schoolhouse that sits on the top of the hill. Half of it had been ripped out by a tornado and nobody lived there, not for a long time. We caught homeless people in there sometimes, or druggies looking for a safe place to shoot up. We figured maybe that was it. Maybe it was just some sick kid riding a high, but we didn't think that for long. We get within 50 yards and we hear this noise, a screeching kind of sound. It was sort of made up of 2 different sounds. One a high-pitched screech, another was a low-pitched growl. It was making both at the same time. We get within 20 yards and we hear this sound. I can remember thinking that it sounded like paper being torn apart while someone was swinging water in a bucket back and forth. Dad looks at me, kneels down and whispers, "I gotta stay behind him, 'cause we're about to corner him. Any animal will fight when it's cornered, especially when it's a predator, but we can tell by the tracks that it's just one." He tells me it's probably a single feral dog, probably rabid. The plan is to sneak up on it while it's eating, shoot it, and then keep shooting until it doesn't move anymore, and then slit its throat. If it gets to Dad, it's my job to shoot it or stab it to get it off of him. So he walks up and I'm right behind him, just a tad to his side so I can see what it is. I wish to this day that I hadn't. It was leaning over a carcass, tearing off its flesh and throwing what it doesn't nibble at its side. There's blood all over the brick, glistening in the moonlight. It's pale white, human-looking, but not quite human. It had arms and legs like a human, but it sat like a monkey hunched over. Its hands weren't normal. It had long fingers with claws at the end. So we see that and my dad hesitates. He wasn't about to fire on a person, so he clears his throat to try to get it to turn around. I swear to God, all the noise just ceased. I ain't never heard true silence before that and not after it. But for 2 seconds, nothing. Nothing made any noise, which made it all the louder when it turned around, made this shrill cry and jumped on Dad. He got a shot off. I think he missed it. If he hit the thing, it didn't mind, but it was on him, tearing parts of him off. I start shooting it with a .22 point blank, but it barely bled. The thing I got off 5 rounds, and then I started hitting it with the gun butt. It wasn't budging. It didn't even register that I was there. It clawed at my dad, taking off bits of his flesh. It started on his torso, ripping off the skin, and then it moved up. It tore off his throat, his nose, his eyes. It scalped him. Then it started digging in and ripping off the bottom half of his jaw, the little bones in that tube in your neck, and then his ribs. I don't exactly remember what happened, but somehow my dad's knife ends up in the thing's shoulder, and my dad ends up on my back. I'm running, and by God, I'm running faster than I'd ever run before or after, and I know it's following me. I end up back in the woods, opposite the ones we've been in. I'm heading towards my landlord's house because it's a half a mile away. I can hear this thing screeching and moaning. I hear the tree branches crack and get thrown around. It sounds like someone taking an axe to every single tree I pass. It's cracking so loud and often, but I'm not looking back. Finally, I trip into gravel. I look up and there's my landlord and a bunch of his buddies drinking around a campfire. I scream and cry and they come over. I'm telling them to call an ambulance and he looks at me, and I'll never forget what he said. "What's that on your back?" he asked me. And just as he said it, he saw one of those god-awful flannel shirts my dad wore everywhere. It was what was left of my dad. Most of his head, his torso, but nothing after the waist. Suddenly we hear it screeching, and he grabs me. My dad gets thrown on the ground, and I'm fighting him, crying because I think we can still save him somehow. But my dad had been gone before I even picked him up. He has to pick me up and throw me inside before I come with him. He and his buddies were all inside, and they're locking doors and getting guns ready. The landlord looks at me, asking, "What happened? What happened?" But I just don't know what to tell him. He pieced enough of it all together to understand that there was something dangerous out there. All the lights in the house are on and someone calls the cops, and they'll be there in 15 minutes. We look outside and see it walk in front of the fire they'd made. I don't know what it is. One of them says it looks like an ape, and suddenly something goes through the window. We shoot at it, but it ain't the thing. It's my landlord's dog. Just the body though, not his head or legs. And we start pushing things in front of the door and windows when we hear something in the garage. I remember one of his friends saying that the doors were open, and we hear metal and glass just getting ripped apart. We put a couch and a TV in front of the door to the garage. It banged around some more, but then it got quiet. Not silent like it was before. We could hear it move around some, and the guys were talking, making sure the guns were ready. Someone hands me a pistol, and no sooner did I cock the hammer back did we hear something shatter upstairs. Then we heard it screech again, except now it was louder, and it didn't echo and fade out because it was inside with us. We all rushed to the one door leading upstairs, and we got to it just as that thing did. It opened it just a bit, and 4 or 5 men just slammed into it. It got its hands through. Someone with a shotgun took care of that, put the barrel right up to its wrist and pulled the trigger, cut its hand clean off. That only made it angry, though. It started pushing on the door, clawing. We were on one side, pushing as best as we could, and it was on the other doing the same. That wood just wasn't going to hold, so someone tells us to keep our heads down. Suddenly, the top half of the door is just gone. My ears are ringing and there are splinters everywhere. 2 or 3 of them just unloaded on the top of that door. I don't really know where it went after that. The police showed up. I was still glued to that door, what was left of it, and the sun was up before they got me off it. They put me in a hospital for a while, and a lot of people talked to me, but I didn't talk back. Not for a long, long time. When we got back home, I got a job from the landlord working on the farm. We didn't talk much, not about that thing. But I signed up for the army when I was 19, and he sat me down to drink some scotch as a send-off. I asked him right away what the police told him. The story they went with was a wild animal, probably a wolf or maybe a bear that had migrated north or something. I asked him about how they could say that when they had the hand. He looks at me, stunned. He tells me that hand never made it back to the station. The cop who had it in his car wrecked and drove into a tree, died on impact. The hand was never found, probably taken away by an animal. And the cops, when they would acknowledge the hand even existed at all, said that it simply was the paw of a bear that looked like a human hand. I never ended up talking to that landlord again. I guess he went missing when I was in basic, and the cops never found him. They said he owed some people some money and just ran away, but I don't think it's that simple. I never went back to those woods. I wouldn't, even if I had the whole goddamn U.S. Army at my back. And that was my father's story of the rake, or Skinwalker. I'm still not sure what to think. But as I grew older, and when my mother died, I don't think my father felt that he had anything left and he might as well settle old scores. He went back into those woods, I guess, and he never came back. The FBI was called, and they did a show and dance for everyone involved, but I knew that they weren't really looking, and they never did find him. In the summer of 2013, I decided it was time to kill coyotes for that sweet, sweet fur. I grabbed my bare bones basic AR-15 that I got for cheap. I like the way an AK slings a fix, so I ghettoed a sling point to put on the barrel. I slung it on my right side around my neck, messenger bag style, and took my ATV up to a cabin on the mountain. Upon arriving, I took the key to my ATV and started looking around. I had been throwing squirrel and rabbit guts into the woods to attract predators. Checking my bait, I found it all gone, and a strange feeling persisted. The guy who lives on the mountain just down the road left in his car just as I decided that I should look around in the woods. Every time I stepped, I kept thinking that I heard another footstep shuffling through the grass and brush. I saw a stick-figured shape thing at a distance a little bit down the hill from me, and I sort of waved at it and it slipped behind a tree. I thought, okay, goodbye, and walked back to the cabin, deciding to sit around and just drink for a while. I started hearing coyote yelps and stuff in the distance, so I got my gat ready to blast a couple of fools. I sat with the lights off on the porch, but nothing came by. Then the yelping turned into a distant, "Help me." I looked over to the neighbor's house and the lights were off. It didn't click that he left, and I got up and listened. "Help me. Help me." I thought, oh God, he broke his leg and is stuck in the woods with coyotes or something. I got close enough into the woods to tell that it was on an ATV trail, and I decided to take my ATV and AR, driving towards the person saying help me when I came to a U-shaped dip in the path. Without hitting my brakes, I just coasted down it. I heard something right in front of me on the trail scream, "Help me," and I freaked out trying to turn. I ended up flipping my ATV, and I can't really remember, but I blacked out for a minute and woke up under the ATV with it pinned on top of me. I sat still and waited for my eyes to adjust before feeling around. My left leg was pinned under the ATV, and I tried pushing it, but I couldn't get it off. It's like I got 100 pounds heavier in a couple of seconds. The sling around my neck told me that I still had a rifle. I dragged it to me, realizing my arm was bleeding in the meantime. I checked over the gun. The handguard was messed up and the stock was cracked, but it appeared to still be functional. I've got 30 rounds to keep me safe until the night's over or someone finds me. And I sat and listened closely to the sounds of the forest before I heard something shuffling in the grass. That silence is everything. It's dead quiet, and I don't think I've ever felt more fear than I have in this moment. I heard it shuffling around. "Help me. Help me." I didn't know if I should respond or just sit in silence. Its shuffling got closer and something appeared over the ATV, like if you had fallen at a bar and the bartender sort of looked at you funny. This thing looked like it was 9 feet tall, frozen solid. I twiddled my fingers, reaching for my gun, brought it to my shoulder, and sat there pointed at whatever this thing was. I didn't want to look at it because I just felt so much fear. "Help me," I heard it again. I heard it climbing over the ATV. I looked away, but something grabbed my face. My mind went completely blank, looking for the trigger, but I couldn't find it. Slowly, it moved my head over, and I was face to face with this thing. It looked like how almost everyone describes them, a golem that had done crack, carved up its face with sunken cheeks and deep eyes. To this day, I've never smelled anything quite as bad as the breath from that thing. I felt the flash hider on my AR bump into something, and I remembered that I had it aimed at the thing. My brain rebooted, and I screamed as loud as I could. It screamed back. I started yanking, not pulling or squeezing the trigger as fast as I could. The gun was going off, and my ears started to ring. It grabbed my hair and started slamming my head into the ground as fast as it could, still pulling the trigger as fast as I could. It ripped the gun from my hand and started beating me with it. It was still screaming as loud as it could while beating me over the head with my own gun. Lights started flickering through the woods. I was about to black out when I heard something louder than the screaming. I swear I saw the thing's head fly open. I dropped my gun, screamed like a child that had just been shoved into an oven, and ran for it. My gun was dropped 10 feet from my head, and the light was getting closer. I didn't know if I was dying or being saved. Somebody started screaming my name, telling me to hold on. Something was tugging my arm. I looked over, and it was the guy who lived down the road. He had a huge revolver, a Magnum Research BFR. At that moment, I just blacked out and woke up in a hospital with a ton of stitches in my head. When I eventually got out, I asked my neighbor what he saw that night, and he just replied, "A bear. We get them often up here." I'm not entirely convinced that I was nearly beaten to death with my own gun by a bear. It was around November of last year, and I just moved to Washington State, being new to the area. I like the woods, so a few friends of mine who were huge in-a-woods fiends decided to take me out to a secluded spot. What the hell, I thought. I'll do it. I need some time away from work anyway. I got the weekend off, packed my bag, cleaned the rifle, and headed over to my friend's house. We ended up about 25 or 30 miles away from the Canadian border in this forest that seemed to go on forever. I was really digging it because my home state didn't have anything like this. There were 6 of us and 2 dogs, a Labrador and a Rottweiler. Each person also had either a hunting rifle or a shotgun with a handgun, except for me. We parked our cars on this tiny dirt road used by game wardens or border patrol and hiked about 4 miles into the woods. By this time, it was already starting to get a little dark. We decided to build a fire right away so we could set up tents. 2 of the group and 1 of the dogs went out to gather wood while the rest of us started setting up the tent. It was one of those huge 6 to 8 person ones. November gets cold up there, but the tent was set up in about 15 minutes and the trio still weren't back. We said screw it and started a fire with some branches from around the site. We started hearing crashing noises headed our way like someone was running their butts off. The 2 guys came barreling through, wide-eyed, and the dog was nowhere to be seen. They started yammering on about seeing one of the other guys out in the woods acting weird, so they started trying to get close, and every time they got close, though, he would just move away. They said at one point he just disappeared, and then popped up not 10 feet behind them. They also mentioned a really bad rotten meat and spoiled milk smell popping up around them. They tried asking what was up, but there was no answer, and then apparently he took off, sprinting like Usain Bolt into the woods. The dog took off after him, barking its head off, and the 2 dudes lost both the guy and the dog pretty soon, and the smell started disappearing as well. Far off, They heard a weird screeching followed by a really loud dog's yelp. Then the smell came back with a vengeance, this time with what they described as mad giggling. They got out of there and back to the camp. And they got really angry at the dude, but all of us who were there vouched for the guy, and so pretty soon we were all weirded out but still thought that it was just this really messed up elaborate joke. I said as much and got yelled at and then had, well, where the heck is the dog then, tossed at me. Good point. And at this point though, the sun was already well on its way down, so we built the fire up and brought out some Coleman lanterns as well. All of us huddled around the fire, eating MREs, and our guns were at hand. About 15 minutes after dark, the remaining dog, the Rottweiler, kind of perked up and started growling, and I mean, they were really aggressively growling as well. The smell popped back up, and the guys were not wrong about that smell. I had smelled rotten deer carcasses that have smelled fresher than this. Weird groaning started up, and you could hear branches and leaves cracking around the perimeter of our camp. The noping intensified all around, and the dog was going ballistic, so one of the guys with a shotgun, Greg, stood up and fired off 3 rounds of buckshot randomly into the woods. This hellacious screech came out of the woods and started moving away from us fast, and the smell dissipated as well. We waited about an hour and then decided to try and get some sleep with 2 people on guard at all times. The first watch was me and another guy, Victor. The dog was chilling around the fire as well, and 2 hours in, nothing happened, so we woke up Greg and Tom for their turn. After being asleep for a little while, I woke up to that smell, and Greg was yelling his head off. We got up and headed outside. Greg was looking around the edge of the woods with a spotlight and calling out Tom's name. I asked what happened. They had been sitting there when they heard one of the guys from earlier calling out from the woods. The dog started growling and rushed the spot, and Tom followed after. The dog went through some bushes, and he lost him, so Tom followed him into the woods. Greg had been yelling for him when he heard Tom begin to say something before he was cut off. I can't leave him out there. So we all put on some clothes, grabbed a flashlight or a spotlight for each person and our guns, and headed out. By this time, the smell was everywhere and it was making most of us rather nauseous, but we kept going because we wanted to find Tom. We found some of his tracks but lost the trail when they just stopped. Literally no other footprints after a while and none leading back the way he'd come. One of the guys at the back was shining his light around and kind of stopped and made this sort of weird noise, then started yelling, "You freaking jerk, we've been worried sick about you." The rest of the group walked over to look, and there was Tom standing a good 20 feet away, but he was standing very wrong. "Are you okay, buddy? You need some help?" He just stood there, deadpan, and slowly nodded yes. A few of us walked over and put an arm around his shoulders to kind of support him. We noticed that he reeked, and the dude hadn't even been out here for a full day. Now laughs abound except for him, and we thought nothing of it except worried that maybe he fell and hit his head or something. Back at the camp, we tried to lay him down, but he just refused to, so we let him stay outside by the fire. A couple of us went to sleep, but Greg, Vic, and I decided to stay up and keep an eye on him. Watching him, he did weird jerk muscle spasm type things every now and then, very creepy stuff. We thought that it might be something serious. He was mostly quiet and slow to respond to things until it came to food. We gave him an MRE to eat and he only ate the meat out of it. We shrugged it off and then he got up and started moving around, very jerky-like, looking towards the woods. He asked us if we wanted to come into the woods with him for firewood. Besides the fact that it was pitch black out, besides the fire and also the huge stack of firewood that we collected on the way back, it wasn't all that weird. He jerked something like a shrug before walking weirdly into the woods, and at this point, we were on guard and didn't try to stop him. Greg got up a few minutes later to step into the tent for something, so I was outside with Vic when the smell hit my nose like a ton of bricks, and I gagged. Then I started hearing some sort of gibbering and giggling. I'd never been more freaked out in my life, and you could tell that Vic was feeling the same. Greg came out in time to hear it really well, and then went inside to wake everyone up. He froze at the tent flap and then started cursing, which woke everyone up. I didn't know why he was cursing, but it was working. When they were all up and awake, he counted everyone, and you could see him turn white. "What's up, dude?" Apparently, while he was inside, he did a quick body count, and there were 4 bodies inside. Someone or something had been chilling in our tent without us realizing that it had gotten in. We lost it hard at that moment, and then everyone started asking where Tom was. At this time, the gibbering gets louder, and you can hear a bunch of nonsense moving through the woods. We hear Tom's voice calling at us from the woods to come help him, but it's all off key, and every now and then he would start giggling. We built the fire up and sat around it with all the lanterns on full and weapons at hand until the sun started coming up. As soon as it was enough to see, we put the fire out and packed our stuff and made for the vehicles. We started hearing the giggling, and the smell returned, and we just got out of there back for the car. We got there, and there were scratches all over them, and most of the windows were smashed, and the seats were ripped to shreds. We just needed them babies to run, so we tossed the keys into the ignition and heard the sweet, glorious sound of an internal combustion engine starting up. We tossed our stuff in, got in, and sped out of there. We didn't talk about it for a few months, and most of us didn't even admit that it happened. One of the guys with us told us later that he'd seen Tom at the edge of the woods, staring at us as we left, and apparently he had this very creepy grin on his face. And I believe him. I know that I'll never go camping that far away again without at least a lot more people than 6, but I believe that was my first run-in with Skinwalkers. I'm 21 and a college senior from Connecticut. I live in a semi-rural area about 20 minutes from the closest supermarket and fast food. I go to school in Washington, D.C., not the nice part either, but the part where substance users are a problem and cops are reassuring rather than troublesome. I've definitely seen some things in my day. It would be good to mention here that I'm not some glandular freak. I'm 6'1" and 240 pounds, most of it muscle, and Lord knows that I could drop 15 pounds or so. I love to smoke, drink, and eat, sue me, and being the good student that I am, I picked a real major, accounting. I interned for a mid-sized PR firm, doing accounting work and getting paid $20 an hour. College is expensive, so I deliver pizzas at night after the office closes. It's a cheap sort of pizza place with an absurdly large delivery radius, around 20 minutes from my house and 5 minutes from the beach. My place is north of there, and we deliver probably another 15 minutes past my house. I'm actually typing this at work in between examining the fine print on our client contracts to ensure that we are charging them every penny. Believe me, they do everything they can to short us. But anyway, basically the further north you go from the pizza place, the more countryside it gets. I work until close, and this happens at around 9:45 p.m. I'm in the back folding pizza boxes like a good little boy, and the counter girl comes back with a delivery slip. She tells me that this customer sounded weird on the phone, kind of like he was talking through a fan or through his hands, and that he was kind of gurgling. My Washington, D.C. experience instantly makes me think of some user, if you catch my drift, although around here, it's way more likely to be some benzo freak automatically assuming some weird interaction will occur. I look at the address. It's basically in the middle of nowhere. I'm a little mad because I don't want to drive that far, but screw it. Not to mention it's the weirdest ticket I've ever seen. The guy ordered a large pizza with anchovies, ground beef, ham, sausage, pepperoni, etc. Literally $15 worth of extras on top of his pizza. I go to ask the counter girl if this is right, and she says she thinks so. She couldn't really make it out, though, so she said she did her best. She's about 16 years old, so I cut her some slack. Maybe she was daydreaming while she took the call, so I'll just give them a call back to be sure. I dial the phone and it rings. 5, 10, 20, 30 times, but no one answers. I hang up and call again. This time the phone goes right to, "The number you have dialed does not have a voicemail box that has been set up yet. Goodbye." Okay then. My manager decides to just make the pizza as ordered and we would proceed from there. I go out to deliver a separate pizza to a hilariously big guy and a couple who invited me in for drinks, but I don't drink or smoke when I'm working. I was hoping by the time I got back that someone else delivered that pizza order. And surprise, surprise, no one did, and it was my turn again to pick up an order, and begrudgingly, I take the pizza and get in my car. I enter the address in my phone. It's on a side street adjacent to a park locals call open space, which despite the name is actually about 500 acres of straight woods. It's about 25 minutes away, basically the edge of our range. I put on some dubstep and crank my turbo subby while taking off towards this road. Now, if you're not from a rural area, this can be hard to explain. Winter in the woods is scary. There's never a single sound ever unless there's something larger than a cat walking around. It's just you and complete silence. Finally, I make it to the address. There are a few houses on the street, but they sit on probably 5 acres, so they're spaced out a fair amount. I'm looking for number 1134. I pass 1130, then a long stretch of road of nothing, and then it picks up again at 1144. What the heck? I just want to get this over with and get the next delivery without getting attacked by some pillhead over something as small as a pizza. I try calling their number again, and it rings and rings, and then stops ringing. Wait a minute. Someone picked up, but there's no voice. Instead, I hear a buzzing or a humming sound. It hooked up to my car stereo, and it's getting louder and louder until I just hang up because I don't want to ruin my speakers. The windows are fogging up at this point. I'm pulled over between 2 of these houses right when I roll the windows down, and I am overcome by this odor of decaying trash like driving through Newark, New Jersey. It's so gross. I put the car in first and start pulling towards the next house, trying to escape it. At the end of the driveway, there's a stanchion with a light on top. The plan was to pull into this house and knock and ask if maybe they gave me the wrong number over the phone. That would make sense for these kinds of people. I'm probably 100 feet away when I see someone step out of the darkness and into the light at the bottom of the driveway. I sigh. Thank goodness. It's the guy that ordered. I'm expecting the guy to be all over the place, leaning over, acting completely out of his mind, but he's actually pretty calm. I stop the car about 10 feet away from him. He's wearing a big black coat that looks 3 times too big for him, even though he's probably got 5 inches on me. I don't look right at him at first. I grab the pizza and step out of the car. Then I grab the ticket and prepare change if he gives cash. I say to him, "Hey sir, sorry about the wait and for all the calls I made. Delivery's pretty far." There's no response from him. I realize that I should be watching him, considering the red flags. And the smell is extremely pungent, but I know it's not trash day. I get the pizza on the roof of my car, and he's standing there under the light on the opposite side. I finally pay enough attention to get a good look at him. The guy is basically a giant. He's wearing no shoes, and he has ripped up jeans, and there are stains everywhere. I try to get a good look at his face, and his eyes seem to be sunken in. I can't even see the actual pupils with the light from here. It's like they're just black craters. I'm getting really sketched out at this point because the guy still hasn't moved or said a word. I stop the process and stare at him. He's staring right back at me with those freaky eyes. His head is sort of bobbing side to side, but not in any sort of fluid sense at all. Kind of like a car door, like how it stops halfway open and then you give it another shove and it stops at the all-the-way point. I watched his head do this with no real pattern for about 10 seconds. I'm starting to get more uneasy between the stench, his head movement, and the eyes and him still completely ignoring me. I stand frozen, and so does he. Without breaking eye contact, I take my phone out of my pocket and hold it level with the roof so I can look at the guy and my phone at the same time. Curiosity overflowing, I decide to go to the recent calls on my phone and I redial his number. The phone starts ringing, but I don't hear it anywhere. Wait a second. I do hear it. It's coming out of the quiet of the woods. I can hear a faint, distant cell phone ringing about 50 yards away in the woods, and I'm kicking myself at this point, almost soiling myself. The guy's just standing there, still doing the head thing, but I swear to God, I see him smiling. Finally, I get the courage to speak. Can you please come get this? Also, I think you might have dropped your phone or something when you were hiding a body or whatever in the woods. I laugh nervously, still thinking maybe this guy just dug too deep into the prescription pills. And I see his mouth open, head still bobbing, feet planted on the ground. He makes a sort of low, guttural, quick grunt, and then a high grunt, and then a low grunt, and they're sort of soft, kind of like someone clearing their throat. At this point, I'm ready to book it to the driver's seat if I have to, and just as I go to redial that phone again, I hear him talking. That phone's not mine. The pause between the phone's not and mine was way too long. Phone's not literally sounded like one word. Mine came off as an octave higher. My mind is in DEFCON 5, full-on panic mode. My knees are weak and I'm literally about to pass out. I push the pizza to the far side of the roof away from me and I finally muster out, Sir, you're freaking me out. I got a 45 and less than $20 on me. Just take this so I can leave. When I say this, his head bobbing stops. His eyes are dark and burning a hole through me, and he opens his mouth again. His? What? I asked, stunned. It was his. The phone was his. The guy starts coming towards my car. Not a step, but like one huge muscle spasm that propels him forward. The phone was his, he repeats. I'm on the verge of tears at this point. The guy jerk jumps again, now closer to the car. Phone's not his anymore. I blubber wordlessly, then gather myself and scream. I'm gonna call the cops, man, if you just don't get out of here. I see this guy smile, that creepy smile, and without moving his mouth, I hear him say in a completely different voice, a voice I've never heard before. Go away. Stop following me. I will call the police. In another big jerky motion, the thing reaches forward, takes the pizza off the roof, and places a couple of round things that I later identify as quarters on the roof. They're surrounded by this dark liquid that spreads over the roof. I don't even think. Just get in the car and peel out down the road. I leave the hot sleeve for the pizza too. I leave everything. Don't even close the door all the way. I get down the road going about 80 for a quarter mile, then pull a U-turn because I don't want to get even more lost with that psycho out there. I whip down the road past the place where I had just been, and he's gone. I finally get to the end of the road, and there's a stop sign to merge with the main road. I look right to make sure it's clear, then I look left. That thing's face is 12 inches from my own where I turn. I tactically have a heart attack and peel off down the road. I finally make it back to the pizza place, shaking like crazy. I smoke just to calm down, which I never do when I'm working. I walk in the front door of the pizza place. Hey, a guy at the open space house just called back. He said you forgot some food, but he only ordered the pizza, right? He wants you to come back. And I start crying. I look at my phone, which had been thrown through the car when I was driving. There are 14 missed calls from his number. All the voicemails are empty except the last one. All I can hear is ragged breathing and those low, grunting sounds. I'm bawling my eyes out in front of this hot counter girl, but I don't even care. I sit for 10 minutes trying to calm down, and then I remember the change that he had left on the roof. I steadily go out to the car and turn on a flashlight. The roof of the car was covered in the most viscous, weird fluid, but it smells like copper. I throw up. In the panel gap between the trunk and the end of the rear window, I find the quarters. They're covered in that same gross maple syrup goop, and they're stuck to it along with the fluid. I can now see what appears to be a soft little chunk of tissue. I go to open my car and my veins turn to ice. There is a single line of this fluid going from the front quarter panel to the driver's side door. That freaking thing tried to open my door when it was next to me at the stop sign. I go back in, crying harder now. I tell the counter girl to try and call the number again for me. She tries over and over, but the phone goes right to voicemail. The next morning, I give the number to my uncle, who was a police captain a few towns over. He says the number is a burner phone paid in cash, basically untraceable, and it appears to be turned off. Now, I sleep with the lights on these days. I was 23, stalking in the woods in the Ozarks of Arkansas, to be exact, with some new gear that I had been saving for months. Boots, a tack vest, even a mil-spec gas mask. It was like Christmas being where I was and wanting to field test some personal prototypes. I had my nugget on hand. It wouldn't do much against the big bears, but it would ruin any snake, stray dog, or cougar's day right to hell. I had a bunch of strippers and 2 clipazines I built, and I wanted to field test them in my pouches. I got some rolled up targets stuck in my loops and a light complement of survival gear. Compass, topographical map, thermal blanket, extra undies, MREs, canteen, and camelback, the works. Basically prepared for the inevitable invasion of any type. I was having a great time romping around the woods, playing with my field of view and the mask, testing the reliability of the clipazines, and generally having fun. I wandered next to a creek bed and decided it was time to practice my guerrilla tactics. It was late summer, early fall, so no danger of getting my gear wet in the non-existent stream. My stuff was in more danger of water damage from my own sweat. After triple-checking my safety, I proceeded to do a series of screen slides and uphill hustles in full survivalist gear. Needless to say, I got winded really quick. I stood panting in that dry stream bed and decided to check my position with my topographical map and compass so I could set a course for home. In the middle of reorienting myself, I caught wind of a smell. At first, I thought it was my sweat, but the funk quickly evolved into something worse. A dark undercurrent of rot, deep notes of animal musk, a bassy score of raw garbage punctuated by garlicky timpani, and a thick black score of something between skunk and onion sludge. I went into straight operating mode, popped an Addy from my pouch for extra focus, pulled the clipazine from my nugget. It seemed to be working fine, but if I was going to have to shoot something, I prefer not to have any risk of jamming. The smell made me gag and I nearly puked up that Addy tablet. The smell was that strong at this point. Whatever the source was, it was definitely mobile and getting closer to me. Screw it. I pulled up my mask from around my neck and over my face. It helped a bit, but the mask wasn't 100% airtight around the joints, so some of the smell got in. I walked cautiously and slowly along the creek bed toward where the slope was shallowest, listening for twigs snapping or animal sounds from above me. I definitely heard something shuffling around up there, and it sounded bigger than what my nugget was up for. It was a near constant snuffle, grunt, and sloppy, uncoordinated crunching around bark and leaves, all mixed with a smell. My mind immediately jumped to Big Bear, and I mean big, possibly even rabid if it smelled like that. And let me tell you something about Ozark big bears, straight from my dad's mouth. My dad's lived in the Ozark for 58 years, and in that time, only 2 things have managed to shake him: the challenge of fatherhood and the big bears. According to him, the native black bears were hunted to near extinction between the 40s and 50s, and to correct this, the ANRC, NRCS, and Arkansas Fish and Game Commission released 250 bears into the Ozark and Ouachita Mountains. Their website insists that they were all black bears. My dad insists that that is bullcrap. According to him, more than a few of the bears released there were brown bears. They inbred with a few remaining local bears and the reintroduced blacks. Thanks to a little phenomenon known as hybrid vigor, the resulting offspring were bigger and meaner than their parents, and screw me, were they fertile. When I asked him to prove it, he simply left the summer porch, went upstairs, and came back with a manila folder labeled BB. He pulled out a couple of Polaroids and asked me to take a look. I saw a big black and brown something rooting around a clothesline. Dad directed my attention to the clothesline about 50 feet away from us, between the two poles, about 5 to 6 feet above the ground. It was the same clothesline in the picture. The something's shoulder was about a fart's length under the line, despite being further in the background. I looked through the other pictures. One was rooting through the trash, another was barely concealed by trees, all of them slightly shaky. Detail was hard to come by, but I was convinced. My dad told me 2 things about how to avoid getting attacked by the big bears. Big bears are dumb as crap, something to do with them being hybrid. This makes them more dangerous than other bears because they're not afraid of you. This also makes them smell like crap, and you'll smell them coming a mile off. If you smell a big bear, get inside, get upstairs, but take the 12 gauge and some deer slugs. If you do see a big bear and you ain't home or you ain't got a shotgun loaded with slugs, hide up a tree if you can. They're faster than you, so there isn't any use running. I tell you all of this because after 23 years, I'd finally managed to prove my dad wrong about something. Well, half wrong. There's something in the Ozarks that matches my dad's pictures of big bears, but whatever they are, they sure as heck aren't bears. So back to my story. I would have stayed in that creek bed and waited for that something to screw off on its own business, but the light was already slanting through the trees. As bad as my dad made big bears sound, I was sure as heck not wanting to be stuck with a god-dang rabid one after dark, and instead, I opted to climb up the opposite edge of the creek bed. I had to scramble over some big rock outcroppings and half stand, half lean against the slope of the hill, but I figured that if anything, that would just be an extra layer of protection against that something out there. I gotten a few glimpses of it over my shoulder as I climbed, but this was my first good look at it. I just couldn't stop staring. Like I said in my previous post, this was not a bear. It was bear-like, but not a bear. I've been into sci-fi my entire life, and even got Barlow's Guide to Extraterrestrials from my awesome late stepmom. So when I saw this thing for the first time, my freaking nerd brain immediately went, oh, a solidor. Except it wasn't. It looked like a solidor. A grizzly bear and a sloth had a 3-way on top of a garage heap to make it. It had a long prognathous snout like a stubby trunk, with big angular shoulders, feet that looked like manhole covers covered in dirty matted fur, and a body like a furry blimp. Its fur was the same charcoal black and dark glow brown that I saw in the pictures and full of mats and clumps of dirt. I mean, I stared at it for so long, drinking in those details, trying to make sense of it for 2.5 minutes, and it somehow didn't notice me. Jesus, these things were dumb. I remember feeling a twinge of relief. If it hadn't noticed me yet, trying to scrabble out of a rocky gully, it probably won't notice me sneaking away from it. It's going to sound ridiculous, but I farted then. The something stopped. My breath stopped. And my heart stopped. The only sound in those woods at that moment was my freaking fart echoing and the sound of my nose blistering under the something's odoriferous assault. It was like slow motion when the thing turned its head, looked back at me, sniffed the air, and stood up. It had been shuffling around crouched low to the ground the entire time. What I thought were shoulder blades were its freaking elbows. It could tie its shoes without bending, but its paws probably would have crushed its Air Jordans to bits. They were like trash can lids. It sniffed the air again and coughed or barked like it was asking me a question. It sounded like gorp. I swear on my mom, that's what it sounded like. Gorp. So there I was, the idiot who didn't listen to his dad, The awkward cringe lord who freaking farts when he's trying to sneak away from a freaking gorp. I aimed at it in center mass, and I fired. It didn't thwack into the gorp because, hey, if you're gonna die, might as well give your killer a stupid name in your head, right? Instead, the shot thwumped, if that makes sense. There was a puff of dirt and hair when it thwumped, and bless my luck, the gorp actually flinched from the impact. I waited to see blood. I guess the gorps are so covered in nasty flea-ridden hair mats that over time, their poor hygiene gave them natural body armor because I didn't see any red at all. What it did do was rear up and gorth at me, a low growl that had my colon deciding that it was a warning because it was producing bricks enough to construct a barricade. I worked the bolt and fired another shot, this time at its ugly sloth bear elephant-looking face, and this time it did thwack, and so did the dirt a few feet to the thing's left because it ricocheted off its skull. The thing stood there staring at me like it was too dumb to realize that it could have just stood in the stream bed and grabbed me by my face while I pelted it with useless bullet after bullet. I yelled at it and fired a third shot in any direction at all, trying to scare it off. The gorp, or gorth, or big bear, whatever it was, dropped to all fours, lurching forwards towards me. Then I did a 180 and shuffled away. It worked. I stood there until the sky turned blue to orange before I snapped out of it and tactically retreated back home. When I got back, I told my dad the story. I probably should have mentioned that I was visiting him for a few days. He could probably smell Big Bear on me, so it was no use lying to him. When I got to the part about what the big bears really were, he refused to believe me. Then he got pissed at me, locked the doors, and camped out upstairs for the rest of our visit. I had to freaking bring him beer from downstairs when he started to talk. The weird thing is, as scared as he was and as weirded out as I was seeing him that scared, I wasn't scared myself. I remember that very clearly, not being scared at all. I guess you could say I was just too interested or curious to be scared because if I was scared, I would have just bolted away, and I'd probably be typing this from inside of a year-old gorp turd. If I had to guess, that Adderall I popped probably kept me from switching into run home scared to mama mode. Well, that's how I met a gorp and lived. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday night. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/LetsReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, and click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, he growled with his butt.